Good morning, preppers. Welcome to Goshen Prepping. Listen, 3 foods, 3 of them. I want you to make it so when you prep, when you put your stockpiles away, you can do it for the least amount of money and the best bang for your buck, and get the most things stored away as you possibly can. And when it comes to doing that, there's 3 things. I mean, obviously, there's a whole host of foods you can store away in your prepper pantry, but these 3, stick through all 3 of them, are going to make it so you can prep quickly and efficiently. Okay, let's jump right into it. The first one is rice. Okay, now I'll recommend always simply just white rice. There are other rices that'll keep for a long time, but white rice is just great. Like brown rice, certainly not, because the product will actually, it has like a 6-month shelf life, something like that. So we don't store away brown rice, at least not long term. But white rice is great. I mean, I recommend it for a few reasons. Number one, it is so cheap. And even though right now the world has a white rice shortage, the United States, I haven't seen it happening. Every time I go to Sam's, every time I go to Costco, all those places, you can get it. You can actually even get giant things of white rice from like Walmart. And by the way, even if you don't have a Sam's membership, a lot of times you can go to walmart.com and order like a 50-pound bag of rice and actually have it shipped in. Not always, but sometimes. Okay. Now, when it comes to white rice, I'll tell you right now that the easiest and best way to store it, we use these plastic bottles. Now, people say that's a horrible idea because the plastic bottles will actually leach in plastic. And I'll be honest with you, even with my background in science, even though that is a possibility, you want to store this in a cool, dark place anyway. And in a cool, dark place, the risk of leaching of plastic is very minimal, if not at all. Okay. So take the rice as soon as you get it in your bag. And if you want to prevent rice weevils, all you do is simply take the rice and freeze it for 24 hours. Some people do 2 or 3 days, but 24 seems to be good enough. Pull out the rice, let it thaw, get the condensation off it, and then pour it in the bottles. Now, what we do as a family, we'll buy 100 pounds of rice at a time, a couple 100 pounds, and we'll get all the bottles out. And we use, these actually used to contain seltzer, soda water, which doesn't have any sugar in it. If you want to use like soda or pop bottles, whatever you call it where you're at, that's okay, but you have to understand, you have to make sure you thoroughly wash out all the sugars and everything because, bacterium likes to eat sugars. And juice bottle, same thing. That will all work, but we simply use these 2-liter bottles, and we've been doing it literally for decades, and it works exceedingly well. So we take the rice, pour it in. Now, if you don't want to freeze it, that's fine. You'll actually end up with having some rice weevils in there, which won't hurt you. It'll literally add a little bit of protein to your diet if you eat them. That's what they do in third world countries. But if you don't like rice weevils, I get it. The freezing will kill the eggs. But after that's done, you pour it in these bottles, and you don't simply just pour it in and put it on the shelf. You pour it in to the absolute max on the tippy top. And what happens is you'll end up with a bottle that looks like this. Okay. Notice that, honestly, there's a little gap on there. This probably could have been filled up a little bit more, but you'll notice it's indented in, and that's because the rice has absorbed oxygen and moisture from the atmosphere in the bottle. And I'll have people say, no, you don't want the rice to absorb the oxygen and moisture because that's the whole point of sealing it up. I know, but you're not understanding the science behind it. Here's what's going on in this situation. Rice will absorb moisture and oxygen, and depending on the amount of rice, can absorb tons of moisture and oxygen. And obviously, if the rice is just sitting out in a bowl for days or weeks, it's going to start turning gross because your house is full of oxygen and moisture, and the rice continuously does this. This is, by the way, why you put your phone in rice after it drops in water, because it absorbs the moisture from the phone. But when you actually fill this to the very top, understand you're displacing almost all the oxygen and moisture from the bottle. And then the rice for over a few days will absorb the rest of it, which is not much. It's like this much compared to like this much. And it's not near enough to make the rice spoil. Okay. So what happens is you put it in there, then you'll put this in a cool, dark area, and you'll notice the bottle will start sucking in because it's actually its own oxygen absorber. So my point is, when it comes to storing rice, you don't need an oxygen absorber. You don't need a moisture absorber, which, by the way, FYI, those are 2 separate things. People think they're the same. They're not. So at that point, we take the bottle, we write a date on it. And in fact, you'll see like this bottle here, we have numerous dates on here because this has been a process, again, we've been doing for decades. And it is tried and true and works amazingly well. And it's great because we'll simply just say, hey, kids, run downstairs and get another bottle of rice for me. And they'll grab a new one. Then we'll put it in the pantry. Then over the next couple weeks, whatever, we'll just use the bottle. Then we'll recycle the bottle and do it all over again. It is an amazing process that works well. And again, super cheap, You can buy tons of it, and it works really well. And that's why I put it as the first thing you should buy when it comes to stockpiling your prepper pantry. Now, number 2, beyond rice, are beans. Okay, now, I don't care what kind of beans you pick. This is actually a delicious bag of what are called lentils. Lentils are so amazing. Our family loves lentils. We love black beans, refried beans. I guess that's not a type of bean, but kidney beans, garbanzo beans, you name it. We love beans. And beans are amazing for the actual stuff that's actually stocked up in there. And you can buy them, obviously, from Walmart or your grocery store like this. Getting into big bulk bags, you used to be able to buy those at Costco and Sam's, but they kind of stopped doing it for some reason. We order ours now from Azure Standard. Okay, and a quick plug for Azure Standard, you can get massive bags, massive amounts of beans and other stuff too, whatever you want, that's organic, shipped to a drop location that's probably near you. I say probably because it almost goes across the country, and the shipping charges are minimal. And it amazes me when you buy stuff from there compared to like buying it like Amazon, for example, it's like less than half the price. I'll put a link below if you want to sign up for it. It's completely free to sign up, by the way, and do all your shopping, and you actually won't have to pay anything until you actually make your shipment. So there's no charge to be a member, nothing like that. All right, but anyways, beans are awesome, but they will not keep in these bags. You're going to have to do something with them. And these will require an oxygen absorber. What I recommend, and honestly, you could actually do this too. You can simply put these in these bottles as well. Lentils might work pretty well, but the problem is getting the oxygen absorber in this doesn't really work so well. So your options are, I didn't bring them up to show to you, but you can actually do like a Mylar bag, which, they can actually get pricey over time. And of course, depending on the size of the Mylar bag will determine the size of the oxygen absorber. That's beyond the scope of this video, but you'll have to pick that stuff up too. Or you can get a food grade bucket. We'll do that as well. And we'll simply fill up the food grade buckets. You can buy them at Walmart. We buy them from Azure Standard as well, and fill it up, throw it in an oxygen absorber, and it'll be good for decades. But beans are like so essential, and same thing, super, super, super cheap compared to other stuff as well. Now, here's the beauty of these first 2 things, rice and beans. And this is why people always talk about rice and beans. When it comes to your diet, we've mentioned this many times on the channel, that you do not need to ever eat again in your entire life carbohydrates. You don't ever have to eat carbs or sugars, not a single ounce of it the rest of your existence, and you'll live a very happy and fulfilled, healthy, inflammation-free life if you decide to do that. That's the point of keto or paleo. It's incredible. And people who discover this are like, why haven't I been doing this my whole life? But you must have proteins, by the way. We actually have certain proteins called essential amino acids. And people make a mistake. They don't understand. They think essential means you have to have them. No, all amino acids and proteins you have to have. Essential means you have to actually ingest it. You have to eat it. That's the only way you can get it. And there's like 9 of them, 11, I don't know. I forget all these numbers. But it used to be, or when it comes to proteins though, you have like 20 or 21 proteins, amino acids you can actually put together the proteins, and most of them your body can actually make on their own. It'll actually convert one protein to another. So you can actually go through a chemical process and make these proteins, but not the essential ones. The only way to get essential proteins are by diet. And guess what beans do for you? Do they give you all these essential proteins? No, they don't. They actually give you almost all of them. The only one you don't typically find in beans is a amino acid called methionine, but guess what? Rice has methionine. So when you actually put these 2 together, and these are why the first 2 preps, because they're super cheap, you can buy them in bulk, they store so easy, these will last you for decades, and it has all together the essential amino acids you need for survival. It is such an amazing thing that we can do. So prepping, number 2 things, and I can make a video just on those 2 and stop there, but I won't. It is so key to stock up in lots of rice and beans, rice and beans, rice and beans. Being so cheap, you can really stock up your prepper pantry and be prepared for years, if not a decade, with that alone. Now, the only downfall for both of these, is you must actually have to put a lot of heat in to prepare rice and beans, a lot of heat. So you're going to have to make sure you have a heat source to be able to prepare them. Even if you soak them, which is always recommended, and do things like that, it's going to help, but you're eventually going to have to do some cooking into them. You can't simply just put water in there, and your body won't not be able to absorb the nutrients either. You can't break it down as easy. Okay, rice and beans. That takes us to number 3. And number 3, listen, number 1 and 2, you can survive the rest of your life, but I need a little variety in my life too, and I'm sure you do as well. I love the taste of just rice and beans. I love it. But could you imagine going 5 years every day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner with nothing but rice and beans? Yes, you'll survive, but it'll get old. And I have people all the time saying, well, that's why I have like a freeze dryer. We have one too, and we love it. Or a dehydrator, or all those things to be able to actually prepare foods. But listen, the price for a freeze dryer, if you're a hardcore prepper and you're prepping all day long, constantly, all day long, sure, that's great. But most people can't afford to drop $3,000. But can you imagine, instead of actually dropping $3,000 for a freeze dryer, what you could put into preps? That's why I recommend the third thing for you, and this is kind of like a little trick. The third food you should have for prepping, canned food. Now, I say that because, again, it obviously is not just one thing. It's actually a whole host of things. And look at all the different canned foods you could buy, from fruit and veggies and meats, etc. The list goes on and on. Lots and lots of canned food. Because this is great. They're actually relatively inexpensive, and the food in there is already prepared. And here's the key. You ready for this? These cans will last, practically speaking, forever. Okay, I have people argue this, and I'm like, that's fine. You argue, you can be wrong. I'm okay with that. Because as long as the can's integrity is not compromised, the contents will last forever. In fact, I want to go to, very quickly, a website that's going to validate this for me. From the value-rated USDA. Okay, I'm not saying I actually believe everything the government says, but listen to this. You would think out of anybody, they would tell you it wouldn't last very long because, they're all about consumerism and buying more stuff. But if we scroll down, I'll put a link below, by the way, for this website. Does it contain lead? Will commercially canned food last forever? It is done under tightly controlled conditions, careful sanitation, necessary time and temperature controls under pressure. But there are still limits, not how long it will preserve food. In fact, they even kind of like make their own argument about this. There's several factors that limit the shelf life of the cans themselves. Cans can rust, cans get dense, there's shipping accidents, etc. And also it says especially highly acidic foods like tomatoes, natural chemicals in the food react with the container. It will actually over time cause the taste and texture changes, and it will, over a long period of time, lower the nutritional value of the food. It also talks about temperature comes into place. And everything they're saying there, I could not agree more, because you do have to be careful with the can. Now I'm holding the can this way purposely so you can't see the front, because on the front, look what we have, a big old gashing dent in there. Now I'm going to take this, because we're going to have to eat this soon anyway, and I'm going to rip off the label, and I want to show you some stuff about this can. Now I'm going to tape the label back on, because we don't want to have like some kind of mystery can hanging out in the pantry. But I want to show you some things about this can. Again, a video that I'm going to link at the back end of this, it'll talk about what to look for in a can. But this can should not be stored away to last forever, practically speaking. And there's a few things I want you to see about this. Number one, you have to make sure this seal at the top doesn't get compromised. If you got like a dent right here, it's actually going to be less effective than a dent right here. Because if you actually rupture this little place where they're crimped together, you're going to expose this to the outside air. The can right now is sterile on the inside. And if you break that seal, it's no longer sterile, and you'll start having food that'll rot. Okay? Because when they actually prepare this can, like beans or whatever, they actually put the contents in the can, seal it up, and actually bake it and cook it and actually bring it up to high temperature intact. So inside it's sterile. It is completely sterile. There's no bacteria that'll actually destroy things. There's no mold. And you have to understand, when food rots, it's because of bacteria and such inside the food. That's not happening here. And that's why the food will last forever. Now, there's also a seal on the bottom as well. Got to make sure that seal is not compromised. And there's also a seal going up on the outside, which I'm not seeing it. Oh, here it is. It's right where the label is connected to it. So we actually have a seal right here as well. So you got to make sure that seal is also not compromised. In this can, it's not. It's actually perfectly intact. Now, if your can does get a dent in it like this, dents in themselves may not be a problem, but notice how right here, look at this. Look how sharp that is. You don't want your can to have any sharp dents in there, because what happens is the sharp dents will actually mess with the inner liner, and now the food is reacting with the metal itself. Because actually, when it comes to canned food, there's a liner on the inside that keeps the food separate from the metal. Now, we also have to worry about bulging. We have to worry about rust on the cans, and this can actually has a little bit of rust right here. Right on the seal too, but if I looked at this, I'd say that's probably not a problem. But if the can's completely intact without any major creasing dents in it, that can will last forever. Even pop cans, pop top cans are fine. It just happens to be with a pop top, it's easier for that seal to get ruptured, which of course is problematic. Okay, you got to make sure that you inspect these cans. I don't think you need to pull the label off like I did, But you want to keep these in a cool, dry, dark location. Dark is not as important, but dry is, because you don't want rust to develop on the can, because the rust will start eating through. But if your can, let's say I pull this can out and it's 20 years old and this dent's not here, this can will be perfectly fine to eat. Now, when you're talking about certain foods, like for example, beans, and this is a can of beans, let's say it's 20 years old, some of the beans will break down and become more mushy, but they're perfectly nutritious for you and will not harm you in any way. You may be doing more drinking of bean juice than actually having beans, but you know what? 20 years in the apocalypse, you're not going to care. You're just going to want to have the food. Now, we have lots of kids. When we buy a case of cans, whatever, and we bring it in, you know how flimsy they are. They'll fall down and boom, this will happen. I will take this, and this will go right in the pantry to be used and consumed right away, because you don't want to keep any cans that actually have the seals compromised. And again, people always say, and it's true, rotate your stock. And you do want to rotate your stock, obviously. But when it comes to canned food, they will last for decades like this, decades. But rotating your stock should actually accompany also looking for any type of bulging or rust or dents too. Okay, so there you go. Look, listen up real quick before we head. One last thing I want to say: 3 foods to basically stockpile. And especially if you're a beginner prepper and you're looking to stockpile a lot of stuff, rice and beans and canned food. Rice and beans and canned food. And you can really store these away indefinitely and do very well and actually have tasty food along with it. Now, I will put a link again for another video at the end here that's going to basically say what to look for to make sure that can is not going to be compromised. What do you stockpile? What do you store? What do you like to put away in your basement, whatever the case may be, to be able to survive the apocalypse and do it with tasty food? I really want to see. Put them in the comments below. Thanks for watching.